Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is episode 22 of Azure Zero to Hero series, and in this video we will learn event-driven serverless architecture on the Azure platform. We have done the similar implementation on the AWS platform as well, and this time we will do it on the Azure platform. Let me tell you, this video is a follow-up video, or you can assume it as part 2 of day 21, because in day 21 we learned the theory part where we understood what is serverless, why serverless, and what are some of the real-time use cases of DevOps engineers with respect to serverless. Don't worry, I'll quickly recap those things in today's video as well. But along with that, you will also learn in today's video how to create serverless applications on the Azure platform. You will also learn how to make those serverless applications event driven. That is, the serverless applications are automatically triggered on a particular event, and we will use Azure Blob Storage for triggering the serverless applications. I'll explain about the architecture in a couple of minutes, because before that, I have to tell you that all the scripts that I am using in today's video are available in the Day-22 folder of this GitHub repository. So you can start the repository, fork, or you can clone the repository to get the files that I am going to use in today's video. Also, many of you are asking about the projects, how to add them to the resume, because we have done a 3-tier architecture deployment. We have done voting application deployment, which contains multiple microservices. And we have also learned a lot about the Azure. So many of you are asking how to put these things in the resume. So I have added a complete episode where I will be explaining how to prepare your resume with the things that you have learned in this particular course, how to add the projects, how to add the points, tasks. Everything will be covered in the day 24, which is a new addition to this series. This is added because a lot of you are asking for it. Okay, now without any further delay, let's get started and quickly recap our understanding on serverless. So serverless does not actually mean that there is no server, right? By looking at the term, you might feel that there is no server because it is serverless, but serverless actually mean that a server is created only when you actually need it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a backend application that is written in Java, and then you have a database. Let's assume you have a MySQL database. And the functionality of this Java application is when a user talks to the API of this Java application, then the Java application gets some information from the MySQL database and it returns the information to the user. And on a day-to-day basis, let's assume this API for the Java application is triggered only 10 times a day, right? This is very less accessed Java application. There are other applications that are talking to this database, and these applications talk to the database quite frequently. But you have one application which is very less used, but there is a valid use case for this application that it talks to the database for XYZ things, and it retrieves the information from the database and gives it back to the user. But the number of times this application is called is very, very less. Now assume you create a virtual machine on the Azure platform and you host this particular application on the virtual machine. This virtual machine is running 24/7, right? Because you never know when this application is called, although it is called only 10 times a day, but you don't know at what time this particular application or the API is called. So you cannot technically start and stop this virtual machine. Maybe you stop the virtual machine and someone calls the API and they don't get to access the API. So it is practically not possible to start and stop the virtual machine. So you end up running the virtual machine 24/7, and Azure will charge you 24/7. Now, this use case is not only limited to Azure, but the serverless architecture is cloud agnostic. It is available across all the cloud platforms. And the main intention of the serverless is that when you have such use cases, why do you need to run the virtual machine 24/7? Or why do you need to run auto scaling 24/7? Or why do you need to run any particular resource 24/7 if you don't use it? So serverless introduces this particular concept that you know you do the exact same thing, that you have the MySQL database and then you have the Java application, exact same thing. And this Java application talks to the database, retrieves the information, and gives it back to the user who is calling it. But this time, what I'm going to do it is, instead of hosting this Java application along with the API on the virtual machine, I'm going to put it on a serverless platform. And what this serverless is going to do is that the Java application gets the resources only when someone talks to the API of this Java application. That is, a server is created for you by the Azure platform, and you will be only charged during the execution of your serverless application. It can be a serverless function, and you will be charged only during the execution of this serverless function. During the other time, when this particular Java application is idle or your API is idle, you will be not charged by the Azure platform, right? But for that, you should not be using Azure virtual machine, but you should be using the Azure serverless, which is functions, right? In Azure terms, we call it as functions. In AWS terms, we call it as Lambda. The use case is exactly same. Different cloud platforms have different things. We have also implemented a couple of demos using Lambda, but in today's video, we will be using functions, right? So this is one of the use case. Talking about DevOps engineers. Now you might ask, but Abhishek, why do DevOps engineers need this? Let's take an example. Okay, the same thing that we are going to implement today. Assume there is a blob storage, right? And you have a requirement. There can be multiple requirements. Let's pick up one. So let's say within this blob storage, which you have created within a storage account, files are uploaded by the users. Okay, and users can upload any sort of files, but you have a requirement that if users upload a file that is greater than 1 GB, right? If a file is uploaded which is greater than or equals to 1 GB, then you need to notify the DevOps engineering team, or you need to notify back to the user that you should not be uploading files greater than 1 GB, where you can take two actions. One is you can compress the file, or two, typically you can also delete the file or notify the user that, hey, you are not supposed to upload files that are greater than or equals to 1 GB because of the pricing requirements or any requirements that you have. Now, how would you do this? Very similar, right? What you can do is, one is you can go with a virtual machine which is constantly looking at the files that are uploaded to this blob storage, right? Once in a while, you can pull the information from the blob storage. But what I will be doing, or what is the ideal way DevOps engineers does, is DevOps engineers trigger a serverless function, right? Instead of you looking at the blob storage, what you can do is you can trigger a serverless function. All that you need to do is you need to just write a code, and you can use the Azure Functions platform, which I'm going to show. And only when a file is uploaded to the blob storage, the blob will trigger this serverless function. So Azure will only charge you during that point of time when the execution of this function takes place. And within this function logic, you can handle anything, right? As I mentioned here, you can just print that, you can just put it into the application logs or application insights of the Azure platform that a blob file is uploaded and the size of the blob file is XYZ. Or you can just say that, hey, let me send you an email notification whenever a file is uploaded to the blob storage, and it is up to you, up to the DevOps team or up to the development team to take a look at the properties of the file and react accordingly. Do you want to just compress the file? Do you want to delete the file? Or you can also take particular action within the serverless function itself. That is, when a file is uploaded to the blob storage, the blob storage will trigger the serverless function, and immediately within the serverless function, where you can write that code in Python, Node.js, let's say you write the code in Python, and what that will do is if the file size is greater than or equals to 1 GB, it will immediately delete the file, plus it will also notify that the file is deleted because the size of the file is greater than or equals to 1 GB, right? So you can implement this kind of serverless architecture as a DevOps engineer. But along with this, there are multiple use cases. I'll share some of the use cases so that you can also explain it during your interviews, or this can also serve as some ideas for you to implement as your side projects, right? So another use case can be, instead of blob storage, you can also use the queue storage, right? Let's say you want to use the Azure queue where you want to put items in the queue. These items can be user requests, right? When there are multiple users trying to request for a thing, you can put the user's request into the Azure queue, and you can process the user requests, right? Whenever a user request is uploaded to the Azure queue, the user request can be anything, as simple as access a website and get XYZ. In DevOps world, let's say access github.com and give me number of pull requests that are active. I'm just giving a very simple example for you, but it can be anything. You can consider the scenario of Terraform, you can consider the scenario of AKS, Kubernetes, whatever it is. You can just assume when there is user 1, user 2, 3, 4, and 5, like that there are hundreds of users. You want to process each user's request. So what you will do is you will put all the users' requests in a queue, that is the Azure queue, and you will process the user request one by one. And for that, you can use the Azure serverless, right? Let's say there is a user who is requesting and it is uploaded to the queue at 12 a.m. in the night. And there is next user who has requested, and this user's request is uploaded to the queue at 1 a.m. right? So the 12 a.m. request is processed, let's assume, in just 1 minute, right? This doesn't take a lot of time. So user request is just processed in 1 minute. Then the next request comes at 1 a.m. and the next request comes at, let's say, 6 a.m. So if you use a virtual machine for the same use case, your virtual machine is literally idle for most of the time throughout the day. So what you can do, same example, once something is uploaded to the queue, you can trigger the serverless function, and this serverless function will have the code. And Azure, as soon as someone triggers the function, Azure will provide a server or compute, whatever you would like to think. And on this server or compute, the function gets executed and it will return the output. After that, the server will not be available for this function and you will not be charged. Each cloud platform has a different mechanism. Some of the cloud platforms, they create the servers. They have some spot instances. Some of the cloud platforms, they have spot instances which they use for the serverless. Some platforms, they create servers, they just keep the server stopped, and whenever a serverless request comes, they use the server for you. It depends on the cloud platform on how they implement the serverless, which is internal to the platform. But what you need to understand is, as an end user, you don't own the server when you don't use it, right? The whole concept of serverless, if you just want to understand in one line, if you are using a virtual machine, whether you use it or not use it, as long as the virtual machine is in the start state, if it is not terminated or if it is not stopped, you will be charged. Whereas if you are using a serverless platform, in Azure terms, we call it as functions. So if you are using serverless functions on Azure, you will not be charged if you don't use it, because you don't own that server, and technically you don't have that server when the function is not used. That's the whole concept, and you can use it for a wide range of use cases. You just have to think about the use cases and you can use serverless there, right? People also use serverless. Let's say there are some websites. Okay. So you can just host a simple HTML website on the serverless platform. Let's say this website is very, very rarely accessed. Like this website hardly gets some 50 to 100 views a day. Same use case, why do you have to keep the server up and running only when the server requests are 50 or 100 in number, right? You can host this particular website on a serverless platform on AWS Lambda or on the Azure Functions, and you can reduce the amount of cost. Okay, now let's get into the practicals, because we discussed a lot about serverless in the last class and this class also. I'll take a very simple use case and demonstrate how to create these functions, serverless functions on the Azure platform, and how to trigger them using the blob storage on the Azure platform. Because in today's class, if I try to make it complex, it becomes too much for the beginners. So I'll take a very simple use case, and going ahead after the Azure series, I'll keep making videos on Azure. Similarly, how I make videos on AWS. Then we can further discuss about advanced use cases and we can complicate the serverless architecture. But today's video, we'll try to keep it simple. So the first thing that we need to do is just go to your Azure platform, right? So this is my Azure dashboard that I'm using for today's video. Note, I am using a free tier Azure subscription. If you use a pay-as-you-go Azure subscription, the serverless features are very rich, but sometimes in the free trial, you might not be able to access some of the features of the Azure serverless functions, which is unfortunate, but you cannot typically do anything. You can just follow the commands that I'm sharing, and if you miss any of the particular configuration, again, you might end up using some features of the Azure serverless. Okay, so I don't have any resource groups that are running. I just have one default resource group. So firstly, let me show you about this serverless. So there is something called function app. You can try to understand this as a storage account, just for your example or just for your understanding. So first, we will create a function app, and within this function app, we will create the serverless functions. Just like how we create storage account, and within the storage account, we create the storage services, right? Or the storage resources. So for example, you want to create a blob. What would you do? You will just go to the Azure platform. First, you will create a storage account. And this storage account can typically control the RBAC, right? It can control all the properties for all the storage resources that you create. Similarly, even with serverless, what you will do is first you will create a function app. And within this function app, you will create your serverless functions. Every time I call it as serverless functions, usually people call it as Azure Functions. But I understand there are people who are new to this terminology. So just to make you familiar, I'm calling it as serverless functions. Most of the documentation and all, you might just find it as Azure Functions, which you need to understand as serverless, right? So for that, you can also do it through the user interface, but I will highly recommend you to do it through the CLI, because there are some very simple, minute configurations. If you miss those configurations, you cannot use the Azure Functions from the console. I'm going to show it. So first, let's go to the Day-22 folder. And within the Day-22 folder, I have this script. What this script is doing, all these are variables. End of the day, what it is doing is first it is creating a resource group for us using the AZ CLI, right? You need to have the AZ downloaded and configured for your Azure subscription, which I have explained in the last classes. So you need to have this AZ CLI, which in the step number 1 will create a resource group for us. Then it will create a storage account for us. Then it will create a function app for us. That's it. But there are a lot of parameters that I'm going to pass, right? Such as for creating a function app, you need to pass what is your consumption plan, what is your resource group, what is the runtime that you are using. I'm going to explain it once this everything is created. I'll explain through the user interface so that you will understand better. But when you create it, please try to use this script. Even if you miss one of these parameters, let's say you miss the OS type, or let's say you miss the runtime version, you misconfigure the runtime version, then you will find it very difficult to troubleshoot. Perfect. So let me copy this. While the script gets executed, I'll also explain it for you. So this is my terminal, Day-22 folder. I have cloned it, and I have this script called 01 create function app.sh. If you open, just to show you, this is the same script where we have some variables, right? For the resource group, we have a variable. For the storage account, we have a variable. For function app name, we have a variable. You can also change these variables. So just execute it, 01. So let me grant the permissions. Now let's execute 01 create app.sh, and this will execute against my Azure platform because I have logged into the Azure platform using AZ login command. You should also do it. And if you watch this script carefully, I don't know how many of you actually know this. So I've actually used this script from the Azure documentation itself. But there is this, what do I say? There is this variable called random. And I don't know how many of you know it, but when you try to echo this variable called random, it will generate a random number for you. And I am using this random number just to make sure that if there is already a storage account with the same name, or let's say there is a function app in my Azure subscription with the same name, then it doesn't duplicate and you don't see any failures. That's why I'm using this random, and I'm using my name in front of all of the resources that I'm going to create. So my resource group will be called as Abhi XYZ. My storage will be called as Abhi something. Similarly, my function app is also called as Abhi XYZ, right? You can change it. There is no problem, or you can also keep it. So now this is executed. If we go to the Azure platform, Azure console, and go to the resource group to just show you what all the resources that are created. So this is the resource group, and within this resource group, it has created a storage account for us as we have requested. It has created a function app for us, right? Three things it has created, the script that we have executed. One is the resource group, then it created a storage account for us, then it created a function app for us. Again, don't get confused function app with the serverless. Serverless in Azure is used, is implemented using Azure Functions. Function app is a wrapper on top of the function, which I'll just show you. So if you just click on this Abhi serverless function app, right? If you just scroll down, you will notice right now there are no functions. That is, I have not created any serverless function yet, but you have this function app which will serve as a wrapper, or which will serve as, you can assume it as a place where you can implement the RBAC for all of your functions to just control who can access these functions, who can execute these functions, right? Where does the log streams have to be updated? You can verify the events of all of your functions from one place. Then along with that, you have this authentication that you can control. You can implement certificates. You can set up the custom domains for your functions, right? Let's say you host the function and you want to set up a custom domain for your functions. Again, you can set it up using your function apps, right? So Azure Functions, just like you see here, is the one that implements the serverless for you, is the one where your code gets executed. We will write our code inside this Azure Functions, but function app is a wrapper where you control the things, or it is a wrapper that implements the authentication, authorization, implements your logging mechanism, identity, custom domains for your Azure Functions. And to create Azure Functions, which we haven't created yet, there are three ways. One is you can use your Azure portal. Two, you can do it using Visual Studio Code. Three, you can implement it using the CLI. The reason why I have asked you to follow this script, even if you miss one of these things, let's say you created a wrong storage account and you could not link it with your function app, or you don't use the right architecture type, OS type, you don't use the right Python version. In any of these cases, you might end up not seeing this option called create in Azure portal. Then it will take a lot of time for you to set up the Visual Studio Code, or you might have some issues with your laptop where you cannot install certain packages, which is nothing but core tools. So if you want to set up this entire thing on the CLI of your machine by not using the Azure portal, then you need certain packages like core tools. You need to install some Visual Studio packages if you want to use Visual Studio. So better we do it through the Azure portal for the beginners, because to avoid all of these steps. Perfect. So now let me just take it to a side. Click on create function. And this is where we are starting to write the serverless code and implement a serverless function. Develop in portal. If you don't select this option and if you select Visual Studio Code, then that means you will have the UI access disabled for the Azure Functions, and you will do the coding, you will write your serverless functions, test it on your local machine using the Visual Studio Code platform. Similarly, if you're using terminal, then you will use the terminal with some code tool libraries. If you are very interested in understanding these steps as well, please let me know in the comment section. I can show you on how to connect your serverless functions to Visual Studio Code as well as the terminal as well. That is the CLI as well. But this is a very easy way to do it. So develop in portal, just select the V2 programming model, which is the latest one. And these are the different triggers that we have, right? What are these triggers? Just like I've explained in the theory part, you can also write a serverless function as simple as, let's say I've hosted my website, or let's say I'm writing a very simple serverless app which says hello world. Okay, so when you implement these kind of things, you might not need a trigger. Just to test these things, probably what you can do is you can just write a serverless function and you can just execute this serverless function from your Azure portal, right? So there is no particular trigger or event for this particular thing. You are manually calling this particular thing and it gets executed and it will show on your browser, hi Abhishek or hello world. But there are certain use cases which I have explained. In this video, we will use a blob storage as a trigger. That means as soon as someone uploads a file to the Azure blob, it should automatically invoke my Azure serverless function, right? There is no manual intervention. You can also introduce a manual intervention if you don't use a trigger, right? So this is what we are trying to implement, where we will have a trigger to our serverless function and we will not trigger it manually. Like I will not go and I will not run the serverless function manually, but I want it to be done automatically. So that is what this section is asking about. Do you want to trigger it through an external source? Let's say you can also select HTTP trigger and you can just write some simple HTTP code where it creates an API for you and you can just go to this particular function and run every time to just verify that your code is working. But I want to do through the trigger. So let me select the blob trigger. I've also explained another example of queue trigger, right? So you can use this particular thing if you want to implement the queue trigger. So there are some default templates, but apart from this, you can also create your own. You don't have to use a trigger, but if your use case is very popular, you already have a template, you can use this particular template to implement the triggering. So I'll say blob trigger and select the job type as create new app. You can leave it to the default. Provide a function name. Let's call it as blob trigger itself. Or if you want, you can change the function name to anything. Path. So this path is basically about what path of the storage account you want to monitor, or when a file is uploaded to which particular storage service you want to trigger this particular service, right? That means in your storage account, I think I might have confused you. Let me try and explain. Let's say within your storage account, okay? So this is your storage account. And let's say within the storage account, you have 1, 2, and 3. So this is blob resource 1. Let's say this is blob storage 2, and this is blob storage 3. And you want the serverless function to be only triggered when files are uploaded to the blob storage 1 or the container or this particular container. And if files are uploaded to this or this, you are not worried and your serverless function should not be triggered, right? So what you can simply do is within the path, you can provide the name of your particular blob container followed by any file. You can just leave it as name, right? So I haven't created the blob storage yet because I started with creation of this service and showing it to you. So let me just keep it as samples hyphen work items followed by the name, because I don't know the name of the file that is going to be uploaded by the user. So the samples work items will be the name of the blob storage that I'm going to create. And this will be the name of the file that user is going to upload. I don't know the name of the file that user will upload. So that's why I'm just keeping it as a variable. If you keep this as Abhishek, then your serverless function will only be triggered if the name of the file is Abhishek, right? Actually, yeah, I think we can keep it that way here. And then in the storage connection, you have to use this Azure Web Jobs Storage. And then you can simply click on the create button. It will generate the Python code for you, right? Why does it, I mean, why it will create the Python? Ignore this, it's an internal server error. If it does not create the Azure function for us, we will try to do it one more time. But sometimes it will show as internal server error, but it will create the resource. So let's wait and see. Okay, now why does it create the Python code? Because if you go to the script, here I have provided the runtime as Python. If you change it to, let's say, Node.js, it also supports Golang and multiple other programming languages, then the code will be created as per that. Let me try to refresh and see if the Azure function is created for us. Looks like it is created. Yeah, because I've encountered this error previously also. That's why I know. Sometimes it does not return the actual response to you. It says internal server error or something, but it ends up creating the resource. So this is the function that is created for us. And the Azure function, just like AWS Lambda, is so sophisticated that it has a lot of options for you. If you just go to the code plus test, you can see the Python code that it is created for you, which is a bare minimum code. You can enhance it. You can do whatever you would like to do, right? It just gives you some basic Python code. You can replace it that with the Python code that you want to execute. It is taking some time. But similarly, you have integrations where it will show you what is your trigger, the function, and any outputs that you want to do. If you're aware of AWS Lambda, that also has something similar where you can see the architecture. So here it is saying that my trigger is blob storage. The function is the blob trigger, and I don't have any outputs yet, right? So you can see the architecture here. And then in the monitor, you can see when this Azure function is invoked, what is the output of the Azure function that got invoked. Let's say 10 files are uploaded and 5 times it failed for some reason. See here, you can see what is the success count of your function, what is the error count of your function. Because you need to understand, right? If it is a virtual machine, probably you have some logs or you can keep that information somewhere. Here it's a serverless function, so you cannot technically log into that serverless again, and you don't know what is happening, what has happened. So that's why this monitor will give you sense of information of what is the success count, what is the error count of your Azure function. You can also check the logs. And then you have this function keys. If you have any function keys like the passwords or something, you can have it here. Let's go to the code plus test. One thing that I want to tell you is if you are on a free trial subscription on the Azure platform, one thing that I've noticed is the user experience with respect to Azure functions. I'm only talking about Azure functions, is not that great because I also have a paid subscription. And when I see the performance difference between the paid subscription and between the free trial subscription, there is a lot of difference. So you can also see the slowness. And apart from that, I've also seen some other differences, which I'm not talking in this video, but there are other differences that I've noticed, probably, which is one drawback if you are using a free trial account. Sometimes I've also seen the UI access is disabled. People were also complaining about the ingress controller not available on the AKS. Similarly, there are some features that are missing if you are using free trial for the Azure serverless. We cannot do anything because it's Azure's decision to disable some features or to keep it slow, whatever. So it's a very simple Python program. Your program actually starts here. You can remove these lines. You can import what functions that you want, and you can extend your Python code. But on a simple, if I have to explain this in a very nutshell way, this is a Python decorator. If you know Python, basically this is a decorator, and this is your actual function. So in the function, we just have just like a log statement because we are using a logging package. I'm not using anything like printf because again, this is not working on your local machine or this is not working on your terminal, but this is kind of an API that you are trying to implement. And we are using the HTTP request and response. So we should not be using print statements. We should be using a logging package that will generate a proper response back to you, right? So that's why we are just importing a logging package and it just says logging.info and it prints what is the name of the file that is uploaded to the blob. Very simple one, right? Because in this class, we just want to understand the event driven approach. We have understood the cost optimization techniques. We learned about other things as a theory I've explained, but it will be too much to implement that in this particular video. We will do it sometime once you understand this entire thing and once everyone tries to implement this basic thing, we can go to the advanced. So this is a very simple print statement kind of a thing, which is returning response back to whoever triggers it. And this is a decorator, which is basically passing the information. So decorator triggers even before or it gets executed before your function. So what exactly it is trying to do? So it is saying that on this particular path, right? The name is replaced by the particular file that you upload to the storage. We haven't created the storage. I will do it in just a couple of minutes. And this will be the name of my storage, right? So when I create a blob storage with this particular name, any file that I'm going to upload into the blob invokes this serverless function. And in this particular print statement, it will replace that with the myblob.name. So myblob.name will be replaced with the name of the file and the length will be replaced by the length of the file, right? You can upload an image, you can upload a text file, whatever you would like to. Let's try to see if this works or not. Only requirement is the name of my blob storage should be samples hyphen work items. If you want to change that, just change it here. You can call it as Abhishek, whatever you would like to. So with the script, we have created a storage account, right? What is the name of the storage account? It says Abhi-random identifier. And random identifier is basically a random number that we have generated because storage account has to have a unique name. Okay, so let's take a new tab, probably duplicate it, and let's search for the storage account. Storage. Let's see if we have, perfect. This is Abhi and there is a random number. How is this random number generated? If you don't know, you can just type echo $random. So this is a number. So we are just multiplying a random number with a random number so that we get a even bigger unique number. So this is the storage account. And in this storage account, I have explained in the last classes, containers and blobs are the same. So if you just go to the containers, so we have some private containers already, but let's create one with this name called samples-work items. Create. And now within this, I'm going to upload a file and that file should automatically trigger this function. And we should be able to see that in the monitor section. And we can see if that is a success or failure. And in the logs, we can also see the name of the file and the length of the file. Very simple use case. You can extend that. You don't have to do anything. Let's say you want to compress the file, right? Or let's say you want to print any other properties of the file that you have uploaded. All that you have to do is just go to this particular Python code. Compressing is also very easy, right? I've seen a lot of people, you know, doing file compression using Lambda functions on the AWS platform. If you want to do it, just remove this, use the zip package in Python and compress the file, upload it back to the blob storage. Okay, let's restrict ourselves to this video today. Samples work items. Let me upload a image from my, let's upload this one, something that I've used for my last live. So it's the name of it is DevOps 15.png. It's just a PNG file image. Let me upload it. This is another thing that I've noticed in the free subscription only. When I do the same thing on the paid subscription, the function is invoked very fast. But in the free subscription, sometimes it is taking 2 minutes, 3 minutes, more than that also. So just be patient, right? If you use a pay as you go subscription, probably you don't have to wait so long. But in this case, because I'm showing you on a free subscription, let's see. It is not invoked yet. It says no results. Let me refresh. We might have also done something wrong, but let's wait for a couple of minutes and see. Okay. And meanwhile, as this gets executed, so you can see the logs here. But if you want more logs, you can also go to this application insights, which I've explained in one of our previous videos, right? So you can go to the application insights and you can check the detailed history. But here you can get the information. If you go to the monitor section, you can get the information of the executions and some logs for the 30 days. Let's see again. Okay, still not executed, but basically it should get executed because uh, let me verify the script. Great, the storage identifier is correct. Then all of this is looking good. If we go to the code, in the code, I have mentioned this particular thing as it's very slow, right? So this is what I've noticed. Even the terminal to open or the developer platform to open, I think they should improve the free subscription or probably even disable the complete access if you don't want to support this, because it's as simple as not using it effectively, right? Okay, sample work items, which is correct. Samples hyphen work items. And here I've used the name, which is right. My blob, my blob.name. Everything looks cool. Let me look at the integrations one more time. Integration also is good. So integrations, basically, it will try to explain you if your architecture is right or wrong. There is one more concept here. You can also add inputs and outputs, which I have not covered in this video. But if you go to the integrations, right here, I can add some inputs. There is only one trigger, but you can add multiple inputs. You can also add outputs. We will cover some other time, because the goal is to help everyone implement the basic one. Then we can go to the extensive one. I think it got triggered, right? When I was explaining the integration, in the monitor, I saw one success. Let's wait for a minute. Yeah. So success count is one. We just executed, we just uploaded one file and that got triggered. If you go to the details of it, you can see the complete details and you can see the name of the file, DevOps 15.png, right? Which is the same file that I have. And if you go to the logs, again, you have some restrictions with respect to logs as well, but I hope it gives you enough information. Yeah, during the execution, we could have got it, but we can also go to the application insights. But for now, what I want to show you here is you have the file and it has triggered the serverless function. And then what you can do is endless, which we will definitely try to do going ahead. But as part of this Azure Zero to Hero series, you need to understand what is serverless, how to implement the serverless. And when you try to explain this, when you try to explain this to your interview or try to do some proof of concept for yourself, all that you need to do is just modify this Python code, right? You can technically also, what you can do is, just for your idea, right? You can pass some strings from your blob storage. Like, you can upload an index.html file into your blob storage, and you can render it within this particular serverless function, and you can host it as a HTML file, right? You can also do that, because end of the day, it's a serverless, but while you are executing, you will have the server and you can host your HTML file. We will do more with respect to cost optimization, because that is my interest area. I'm not focusing on web development or something. So in future videos, when we do more critical examples on the serverless, we will do some cost optimization or other things. So that's all about the video today. And I want everyone to try this out. The script is available on my GitHub repository. Please follow the same steps. If you are using the free subscription, if you're using pay as you go, still you have a lot of things to play with. But if you're using free trial subscription, please use the same script. Even if you miss a simple option, you will not get this UI access. So yeah, that's all for the video. Thank you so much for watching it. See you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.